All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for IOP Fellow Laura Washington's 8th seminar as part of the ChiElect program covering the issues, concerns, and candidates who will be playing a major role in Chicago's upcoming mayoral election on February 26th. Laura Washington, as I'm sure many of you already know, brings extensive knowledge of Chicago politics and journalism to the IOP. She has served as an editor for the Chicago Reporter, a nationally recognized publication covering race and poverty, as well as deputy press secretary to Harold Washington, Chicago's first African-American mayor. She's currently a columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. We are also delighted to have candidate Jerry Joyce here this afternoon to discuss his vision for the city of Chicago and why he is running for mayor. Mr. Joyce is a former assistant state attorney on the executive staff of the Cook County State's Attorney Office and currently works in private legal practice. Mr. Joyce is a lifelong Chicagoan who is very active in the community. Today's seminar is on the record, which means you are free to take photo and video. Students will also have the opportunity to ask questions following the seminar. Thank you for coming and enjoy.
And welcome, sir. How are you?
Having me?
So a week out, or a little bit more than a week out.
Hard to believe it's here already.
Yeah. How's it feeling for you in terms of where you are in the campaign?
I feel we're in a good place right now. I think it's wide open. Nobody can predict turnout, experts or non. And I think with so many people in the race, so much dissatisfaction on the electorate out there with the state of affairs for the past several years, I believe. I think we're in a good position, but I think it's wide open.
When we say dissatisfaction for the state of affairs for the last, you're talking about Mayor Rahm Emanuel and the way he's run the city?
Yeah, that, and I think just the politics in general and the direction I think the city's been going. I think there's a mood out there looking for change, something different. Maybe go away from the familiar faces, those that have been in office.
What made you decide to you jumped in? I remember it was back in the late summer was when your name started to really emerge, which was just right before Rahm Emanuel decided to not run for re-election. When did you decide to run, and what was other than what you just said? What was the reason for it?
I decided late summer. Was contemplating it for months leading up to that. Several factors went into the final decision. But we did start circulating petitions on the first day you could circulate, which was August 28th, as I recall. And that was a couple weeks before Mayor Emanuel decided or announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election. And
so you were in before?
Yes, that was a surprise to me. Well,
it's surprising. So you were planning on running against him?
Right,
yeah.
right. So things changed as far as the strategy and dynamics, but reasons for running didn't change.
And what was your reason for running?
I'd like to tell the story about watching the C-SPAN a while back, and there was an author being interviewed on there. And he was a New York Times #1 bestseller, Brad Thor, Spy Master series. I don't read his works, but interesting fella. And in the course of that, he was asked where he lived, and he responded by saying his parents were both lifelong Chicagoans, and he himself was a lifelong Chicagoan, and his wife and he were raising his children there. But he said things in Chicago gotten to the point, and he said Illinois as well, Chicago, Illinois. He got to the point where he had to ask himself the question, were he and his wife doing a disservice by raising their family there and living in Chicago and continuing to live there? And regrettably, he relocated to Nashville, Tennessee. And that sort of crystallized what I think a lot of people in Chicago are feeling, and people that have been talking to me were feeling. So concerned about the future of our city. Should they stay, should they go? And I don't think that question should be asked for those reasons it's being asked so widespread throughout our city. And rather than relocate, I want to do something about it. There are so many people in Chicago that want to be a part of the solution. We have serious problems and challenges, as you're well aware, going forward into our city on so many fronts. But there are solutions. They can be dealt with. Chicago continue to be a great city and even greater and have a bright future. And I'm grateful to be raising my children. My wife and I are raising our children.
And your son is here today, right?
Son Jeremiah is here.
Jeremiah? Named after your father?
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes.
And you have how many children?
We have 4. 2 boys and a girl, Jeremiah, Karina, Christian, and Kaylee.
And born and raised, everybody was born and raised here?
Yeah, Pretty much. They were actually all born in Guatemala, but
but
all
yeah,
raised here. Yeah,
here.
we're all
Right.
living. My
What
wife and I
neighborhood?
raised them. We live in Beverly. I grew up in Morgan Park, so a house a mile and a half from where I grew up. Wonderful neighborhood, wonderful neighbors. Grateful to be there.
Yeah, yeah. Now you said that there's a lot of problems. Could you? I mean, we can't get to them all
Yeah,
in an
right.
hour. But give me your 2 or 3 top priority issues, and what you are going to bring to them as mayor, and what makes you different in terms of the solutions you're going to offer.
Okay. Public safety for me, first and foremost, the #1 issue. Close seconds, no question about it, but could solve everything else if we don't have safe neighborhoods, safe schools. The rest of the solutions aren't going to matter. So to me, police department, support the police department, resource it, training. The numbers dipped precipitously over the past 8 years. As you're
Numbers
aware,
for
both number of police officers and detectives. That's come up recently, which is kind of an acknowledgement that was a mistake to let those numbers dip so low. The clearance rates, as you're well aware of, have plummeted. Those are abysmal, both on violent crimes, basically, but homicides and shootings. In addition to that, this community policing this kind of means so much nowadays, and depends on where you go in Chicago, within Chicago, and outside Chicago. I have a plan for community policing is kind of at its essence, whereby we have teams of beat officers, a neighborhood immersion program, 1 sergeant, 10 beat officers, stay on that neighborhood beat, though, for an extended period of time. A little water, sorry. Part of the problem with the clearance rates is witnesses are not coming forward. Lack of confidence, lack of trust, lack of relationships, and clearance rates we talk about. Why should they come forward? Potentially making themselves victims when there's no confidence that crime's going to be solved, or violent crime's going to be solved. Because chances are it's not going to be right now in Chicago. We've got up to 3,000 shootings a year, and 5% arrest rate or clearance rate. There's thousands of shooters walking around the streets of Chicago right now, and that can't be allowed. And
So you would beef up detectives, beef up police officers, beef up community policing, make it real. Where does the police consent decree fit into that, which has just been approved by the federal courts?
Which I've been saying on the campaign trail, consent decree is going to be in place by the time the next mayor takes office. So, and now it is in place. A lot of good things in the consent decree, training and concern about financial issues, but it's just another financial issue
In
the city
terms of
Chicago.
what it's going to cost
Right.
to implement it.
Correct.
But you're on board pretty much with the consent decree as it stands?
I
Do you
have
any
issues with some of it, some of the use of
such
force
as?
stuff, the
Yeah.
tasers, when you can use a taser, when you're not allowed to use a taser, the unholstering or pointing of your weapon. I think the details of that need to be worked out. I'm confident that what the concerns I have on the consent decree will be worked out. What is not satisfactory, we can go back into federal court and try and amend or work out. As long as it's the safest measure applied, most efficient, cost-effective, results in a benefit to not only the police department, but just people of Chicago. I think at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants. I think that's doable. I'm confident we can work out those things.
Is it, early on, I remember there was a Sun-Times story that was sort of introducing you as a candidate, and they referred to you as someone who was going to run on a law and order platform. Is that accurate? Or if not, how is that? I mean, when we think about law and order, we think of pro-police, we think of getting tough on crime, which you've talked about. Are you a law and order candidate or something else?
Well, if you're thinking like Buford Pusser, law and order. No, and I read that, and law and order, no. Public safety, yes. I'm a big believer we got to get violent people off the streets of Chicago. We need to have a safe city. I'm also a big believer in second chances. So law enforcement is one facet of public safety, but there's so much on the other end when it comes to providing alternative pathways and other opportunities, particularly to people in underserved or economically depressed communities, neighborhoods. public education-wise? Are we properly equipping people for productive futures?
Now let's
in the
talk
city
about
right
that,
now?
because I imagine that's another one. That's probably another important pillar in your platform.
For sure.
Public.
For sure.
What are your proposals on public education to improve city schools? Where do you stand on school closings? Where do you stand on elected school board and other things that you think are important to share?
Sure. So I'm a big believer in building up neighborhood schools. Every neighborhood, I believe, in Chicago should have a viable public school option, one that's safe, effective, and clean. I shouldn't have to say that should be a given, having clean schools. But I'm a big believer in that because I think that's a cornerstone of strong neighborhoods. And I'm a big believer having strong neighborhoods in Chicago. I think we need to get back to that and support and take all measures to support that. It's essential to the future of the city, in my opinion. The elected school board, I'm for an elected school board.
Fully elected?
My proposal is a 7-member board, 6 elected by district, 1 appointed, mayoral appointee. That appointee should be a guardian of a current student in Chicago. Requirements outside of duties of serving would also include spending time in the classroom. 2 weeks per year would be my requirement on board members. Excuse me. On the school board, neighborhood schools, a looping program. I have a plan for whereby one teacher stays with the same amount of students, 8 students, 1 teacher from kindergarten through 3rd grade, to focus on reading comprehension. The fact that we have 50% of the city college classes first year are remedial is a poor reflection on what's going on in CPS overall. I think there's some great things going on. I think there's great schools in Chicago right now, but there's too many that are below where they should be, below the point where they're doing a service to children of Chicago. We're not asking for a lot, just a quality education. I think the looping program, the most important thing to me is reading comprehension, be able to read and comprehend what you're reading.
And why is that important to you personally?
One, there's calculators out there. You don't need to be a math whiz to get by in this world. You don't need to be a scientist. But you need to read it, be able to read and understand what you're reading to have a shot of doing anything successful, really. It's so pervasive in anything you need to do in our society. So to not have people graduate from CPS that can't read, comprehend what they're reading is a disservice at best. And that's something that needs to and is much better attacked at an earlier age, as a lot of issues are, as you're well aware. So that's.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that's why I'm so big on this looping program, reading comprehension. We need to get back to technical, vocational. Realize that college isn't for everybody, especially given the cost colleges nowadays. Public-private internships. We need to bring back extracurriculars, more focus on arts and other things that provide for a more well-rounded person and education. It's not all about test taking and the numbers. So I would seek to bring those back, incorporate that. Physical activity, gym classes, things that get cut automatically or too soon, or the first things that get cut. I think we need to review all that and perhaps establish a new paradigm. But at the core would be a viable public school option for all students.
All sounds great. I hear a lot of ka-chinging going on, a lot of dollars being spent for some of these added value programs that you're talking about. What's your revenue plan, not just for CPS, but for the city as a whole? People are talking about tax increases, no tax increases, casinos, marijuana. What kind of revenue, for example, new revenue would you need to bring in for CPS to do these things, and where would the money come from?
On the looping thing, I would seek federal assistance on that. That's something unique. It would start out as a pilot project. All this is going to try to shake the federal money tree, state stuff. I don't know that the education stuff that I'm talking about is necessarily going to require a lot of cha-chinging, because it's more, I think, a shifting of resources rather than additional, but it's still a question of priorities.
Yeah.
On the casino stuff, on the other financial stuff facing the city, I am a proponent of casino. I'm a proponent of it whereby 100% of the revenue goes into the unfunded pension liability.
Where, is there a favorite place you'd like to see that casino? You have a
My favorite
dream?
place is the Southworks site. You know, it's a beautiful piece of property, would need some federal assistance on cleanup, but it would also mesh well with the Obama complex, provide potential economic a boost to the south side, would potentially involve widening or widening 41 Lakeshore Drive, provide other access roads into that. I'm talking about, and it can house a whole entertainment complex, not just a casino. And in that complex would be indoor water park, hotel. Some of the stuff they talk about at the Lincoln Yards, the athletic facility, concert venue. Plenty of land out there. It's beautiful, beautiful views. Great Lakes cruising. They have cruising on the Great Lakes now. It's a couple years old, nascent stage still. But we've talked to those folks, and they'd be interested in a harbor or port there. The South Third Airport, South Suburban Airport. Congressman Jackson put a lot of work into that. Saw a lot of potential economic development for the south side of the city of Chicago in that project.
So would you like to revive that?
I would like to revive it and look at it for sure. And we've talked to some of those folks involved in that. And we've talked to some of the folks that were opposing it before and don't seem to have a problem with it anymore.
Oh, really? Like such as?
Staff from Congressman Lipinski. He indicated to me that the city folks didn't seem to have a problem with it. Whether that's because they think it's a dead issue or...
it's easy to say yes to something they think is never going to happen, right?
Right. But given the potential economic impact, at least that some are touting, and Congressman Jackson did, I think it needs to be given a hard look.
So casinos, maybe South Suburban Airport would be revenue sources, other revenue sources, major revenue sources?
And all these, I shouldn't say the airport, because in the casino that on the South Works, it has an additional economic benefit. But I was going to say is all of these, but to the benefit of the unfunded liability and the pensions.
The pensions, okay. But what about revenues to deal with running the city? For example, tax increases. Where do you stand on property tax increases? Where do you stand on some of the other, collateral tax increases, bag tax, some of the things that other candidates have called for to repeal?
I don't think Chicagoans can afford another property tax increase, residential property tax increase. I'm against that, dead set against that. Economically, I think it's a net negative, not a benefit. We need to be attracting Chicagoans, not giving them another reason to consider leaving our city or to bypass when their potential Chicagoans are looking at Chicago as a potential home. The passenger facility charges at airports right now, O'Hare and Midway, I would seek to raise up to $200 million or over $200 million, once again for the benefit of the unfunded pension liabilities. That would, currently those dollars need to be spent at the airport. That would require federal approval to change that.
So you want to increase the passenger taxes for
passenger
the
taxes for those that fly, buy their tickets to fly out of or through Midway or O'Hare.
And you think there's $200 million
well, if it's $2 raise per passenger in excess of, and that would be something that would sunset once we have the pension situation under control. So that's another unique revenue source that I proposed. We need to inventory all of our city assets. Governor Pritzker just announced that regarding the state a few days ago. I've been saying that. What do we actually have on? What kind of city uses are being conducted in them. You know, they have the police and fire facilities, the 3 buildings that they're talking about selling to move into the new academy, the new proposed academy on the west side.
Do you support that academy, the training academy?
Let me explain that. Because I have a proposal whereby you're familiar with the opportunity zones, federal legislation. It's a nice tax incentive.
Explain for maybe some of the students don't know what that
Okay,
is.
so it's a Trump administration passed it this past year. There are opportunity zones throughout the country designated in economically depressed areas. It's a significant tax incentive to invest in these areas. You can take a capital gains on a capital asset you sell, not pay tax on it, roll it into an investment in one of these zones, designated zones, and not pay that tax. And then any gain on that zone, if you keep it in there, that investment for 10 years, that gain would be tax-free. So it's a significant savings. I'll tie that in a second. Unfortunately, the concern, as you may have surmised, with those investments are public safety issues. Why would I put a big investment into an area that is economically depressed? Too often, hand in hand goes an unsafe area. So my proposal would be take 5 of these shuttered school buildings that were shuttered, the 50 that were shuttered 6 years ago. There's like 37 or 38 that are still vacant. 12 or 13 are located in these designated zones. We've identified 5. I can't rattle them off to you right now, but they're on our website. 3 on the south side, 2 on the west side. That can house the public safety training academies for police and fire. Those uses can go into these. There's adequate parking. The facilities are amenable to being refurbished and equipped to house these public safety uses. By doing that, 1, you alleviate some of the public safety concern of potential investors on the opportunity zone investment. I had a fellow approach me after a campaign talk when I talked about this. He indicated he's been following these and involved in these since they came out. He indicated there are funds that are established in excess of $1 billion out there that are investing in these things, in these opportunity zone projects. And they're only looking for a 4% return because the tax incentive is so significant.
When you say they, are you talking about developers or?
No, the funds.
The funds.
The funds,
Okay.
right, right. So, given that, and he also said he hasn't seen it discussed in this public-private venue. So, potentially, we could sell off those facilities, as the city had plans to do. They've greatly appreciated it. The police and fire academies on the near south and near west side. They went in there years ago. Land is taken off, as you're well aware there. They're talking about $30 or $40 million to be gained by selling these off. They were going to plunk that into the $100 million plus west side facility. So you asked me, do I support the west side facility? Police and fire, the current facilities are outdated, no question about it. And police and fire need and want more training and better training, more consistent training. I support all that. What I'm saying is, given the financial constraints we're under right now, let's not build a brand new $100 million facility. Let's do this instead.
Right.
We can revisit that down the road when our finances are a little more bolstered, but this will be a win-win-win.
This will be much more cost effective. And do you have a cost estimate on what it would cost to do this more decentralized version of
Yeah, our
training?
estimate is $5 million in refurbishings per building. But that may actually, given the attractiveness of the investment, that may be able to be borne by the investor or developer and then leased back to the city. So it could result in a no upfront cost, and then still sell those facilities, plunk that into the unfunded liability. My understanding is they were going to take the $60 million from land out by O'Hare that was going to be sold to the toll road and help finance the new $100 million facility. Still sell that, plunk that into the unfunded liability. The goal with the unfunded pension liability, my plan would be to try and chip away at it and give us some breathing room so that ultimately we can grow and govern our way out of it. And so 100 million there, 100 million there, we're talking real money pretty soon.
Yeah. And you're committed to honoring that pension, to honoring the pensions and not changing pensions going forward?
I am absolutely committed. I'm perplexed why it's even being discussed that we would consider shortchanging our pensioners, whether they be first responders who, committed to potentially paying the most ultimate sacrifice, them and their families, or other city workers that help make Chicago the city that works for so many years. And they made a promise, and we made a promise in turn. They held up their end. We need to hold up our end. So no constitutional amendments, no altering of that, no shortchanging them. It's the city has IOUs out there across the board, whether they're pensioners or other vendors or whatever. We need to pay the IOUs, but certainly we shouldn't be saying, well, pick and choose and, well, let's shortchange on this one, particularly when they're city residents, most likely, and more importantly, people that held up their end and had expectations, reasonable expectations.
Right, you have to honor those expectations. So you've spent most of your career as an attorney. You work for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. You've been in private practice. You don't have a lot of big government experience. Have you run any organization, big organization at all? And what can you say to voters who would be concerned that you haven't managed a major city budget, you haven't managed a city department, you don't have a lot of big government experience? What would you say to voters about that?
Right. Well, I would say, what are you looking for in your mayor? We have so many people in public office now with thick resumes of government, elective office experience, and where has that gotten us in so many instances? I think the job of mayor is more about judgment. I mean, no mayor's sitting up there with a ledger, well, this plus this plus this. It's who you hire, it's your temperament, it's your commitment, takes a lot of energy. I do have experience in what I deem the three main challenges facing the city. As you alluded to, I worked at the state's attorney's office, so I've had a up close look at the criminal justice system, many of the issues we're facing today. I've been involved in a wonderful high school on the southwest side for the past 25 years in pretty much every facet, from development, the curriculum, the mentorships, the coaching.
Which school
Marist
is that?
High School.
Marist, So you've been like on the school board and volunteering and that kind of thing?
Correct. And I did study economics at college. So those are all pluses, but more importantly, as I said initially, I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, and my wife and I are raising our family here. We're committed to this city. We want to help with the problems. I want to help with all these problems that we're facing, and I do have the plans to do it, I have the perspective, and I have the passion for the job.
What's the first thing you would do on day one as a mayor?
So one of the things I worked at the State Attorney's Office was help Gene Sullivan establish the STAY program, which was acronym was State's Attorney's Alternative Youth Initiative. It was a program, as we alluded to, the helping kids, high school and grammar school kids throughout the county, have exposures and positive experiences and mentorships. And the motto was stay away from gangs, stay away from drugs, stay in school, stay involved, stay active, stay away from guns. So this was done basically, and we had 50,000 at its nadir, 50,000 kids that signed the stay card, the stay pledge, and we had 5,000 plus coaches and mentors, administrators involved in this program. At the city, it's much more equipped for something like that. State Attorney's Office is a criminal justice law enforcement agency. there are a lot of organizations that are doing things like this right now throughout the city, nonprofits, some for-profits, public-private partnerships, whatnot. I would seek to take that template and bolster that so much in the city. And I wouldn't wait till the first day. We've been meeting throughout this campaign with so many Chicagoans, so many, whether they're retired or currently active, either teaching or coaching. So many people in the city want to recognize problems, recognize that there are solutions, and want to help. They're on the sidelines. They want to come off the sidelines. They want to be a part of the solution. And having been coached before and having some experience with some of these people, I've been able to branch out throughout the city, and so I would have that rolling prior to day one. That is, we talked earlier about the law enforcement end. That's the other end that can have such an impact, I believe, and needs to be properly resourced, coordinate all these efforts, these great efforts that are going on currently.
So would you create a new entity that would network all these resources?
I would.
Or would this be under the city government? Would it be out of the mayor's office? How would it? What would be the entity?
The entity would be out of the mayor's office.
Like an office of what?
We haven't come up with our acronym for
okay.
it yet, but you have a sense of what the purpose would be, and it would be well financed, because this, once again, this is at the end of the day, these are preventative things that whatever you spend on it, it's much cheaper to spend it at the initial stages rather than trying to deal with the problems that you're trying to deal with now, rather than trying to deal with them later. And so it would not be shortchanged in any manner, whether it be personnel or dollars or attention.
Okay. We're going to get to your questions in just a minute, but I wanted to go back. At the beginning, we were talking about you feel like this race is still wide open. And the polls would suggest otherwise. There's maybe 5 or 6 people whose names float up near the top. And there's sort of this conventional wisdom that it might be Preckwinkle and Daley, that it might be Susanna Mendoza, and some combination of that. What makes you think that you're going to rise to the top and end up in that runoff?
I think we're in a really good position. First of all, the polls. We haven't been included in a lot of the polls. I know that firsthand. One, my wife was polled, and my name was not in the poll.
How long ago was that?
That was, I'd say, 2 weeks ago. And I've heard it. I heard it before that, and I've heard it since then. In addition to that, nobody can predict turnout, and nobody can actually predict what's going to happen in this race, given all the people that are in there. There was a poll that came out recently that apparently I was in, because it did show us ahead of Paul and ahead of Gary, and we have numbers too, and we have. First of all, we have a great field organization that's been working on our behalf for quite some time, and in a race like this, I think that is particularly important. We are on TV. I don't know if you saw any of our commercials. That is not cheap. We're going to stay on TV. We wouldn't be staying on TV if we didn't think we were in the hunt.
And you're raising money. How much money have you raised to date?
Don't quote me, but I think over $2 million, but I'm not sure about that.
That's more than a fair number of the other candidates.
Right. It's unfortunately, politics is expensive. Races are expensive, but we've done mass mailings. We have several pieces of literature that we've circulated. I think we're in a as good a position as anyone else right now.
And you said you can't predict turnout. There's a sense out there, we were talking about this earlier, there's a sense out there that there's either not much interest in this race, or people are very confused. There's a 20% undecided figure that's popping up in most of the most recent polls. What's your sense of what you're seeing and hearing from your polling and the research you've done about what to expect with turnout, and how you get that? How do you get that 20%, or if you could get a good chunk of that 20% undecided, you could probably prevail.
Right. That's why I think it's wide open.
And
right.
how do you do that, though? How do you get there?
Same thing we've been doing from day one. Just get out. Every part of the city we've been campaigning in. We'll continue that, go hard, and get as much exposure as we can for the remaining week. Let everyone know that we are in the thick of this and that we're finishing strong. There was something else you asked right before that.
Well, turnout, what's your sense of turnout?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think people were anticipating that the field would narrow, I believe. And so I think there was a delay of focus on the race, and that hasn't happened. So I think people are now going to check out websites and what does this candidate stand for? What does that candidate stand for? So I think there is an increased focus going into this last week. There's also, I think, a lot of apathy and cynicism still involved. So I do believe no one can predict turnout.
Yeah,
hopefully voters will rise up and realize how important this election is and make their voice count.
Yeah, do you think that some folks you said there's apathy and people were waiting for the field to narrow. You think some people are just waiting for the next round?
I think currently, yes. Yeah. I think there is a big sense of that out there.
And that's something that you, in particular, as a candidate, since you haven't been at the top of the polls, you want to discourage that message.
Oh, I want people to come out and vote.
Right,
no question about
right.
it. The fact that I wasn't at the top of the polls is the only way that I'm concerned about. That is if there's an effort by those that are supposedly at the top of the polls, the typical names. If there's an effort to suppress voter turnout, suppress the chances of other candidates, to make it appear that these are the only choices out there through social media or other means.
Are you hearing or seeing some of that?
I've seen it on social media.
Yeah.
So, look at clearly these are the only names being talked about, so this is it. When I know for a fact that this is a race that is wide open to several others that are being mentioned.
And when you say there's people out there trying to do this on social media, you're talking about candidates, other candidates that you think are trying to mislead voters? Have you seen evidence of that?
I've personally gotten texts. No, actually, I'm not sure if I've got texts forwarded to me. I'd have to go check whether they were directed to me. I've had at least 3 texts forwarded to me saying, "Hi, who you voting for?" It was, "Oh, I'm voting for Jerry Joyce." "Oh, Jerry Joyce is a good guy, but he has no chance to vote for him before Tony Pritzker. You got to vote for Gary Chico." I've had at least 3 of those.
And these are coming from campaigns.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'd love to see some of those if you can dig those up.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Work on that. So, if you get to the runoff, who would you like to be? Who would you like to be your opponent in the runoff?
Who are those candidates that dropped out?
What?
Who are those candidates that dropped out?
You mean?
I was making a joke.
Oh, okay.
Whoever the weakest candidate is,
Right,
I'd like
right.
to have in the runoff.
Okay.
No, I don't care who it would be.
Well, there's some candidates would be better for you to oppose than others.
That's my point when I said who is that candidate that dropped out.
Yeah.
I wouldn't care whoever it was. I honestly.
Okay. Well, we'll see. You're at the top of the ballot?
Yes, we drew
Yes,
first position. So.
And what is that worth? You done any,
1.2.
Yeah.
Is David Exel around? Let's ask
yeah.
him. I don't know.
There's some people that believe that it has some value, especially in a very crowded race where there's kind of low voter information out there.
Right, especially with a lot of contested aldermanic races. So if somebody's coming out just to vote for that race, they may not take the time to go through and just hit that top ballot. So.
Well, we'll see.
No, thank you very much.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a mic hiding here.
Okay.
So thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Much
It's great.
appreciated. Given the, I guess, kind of toxic political climate near the top here in Chicago, like, for example, the Ed Burke scandal's been in the news a lot lately. Do you feel that being a political outsider kind of gives you a leg up, at least in this modern climate?
I think it's, I do, and I think that goes back to the cynicism and potentially the low voter turnout. I think people are not satisfied and sick of the same old, and kind of assume, there's too much assumption out there that there's no trust in government, no trust in political leaders, and there's so many candidates right now that have some sort of connections to, and are by association, rightly or wrongly, perceived that way.
So what are you hearing from voters when you're out there? Are people talking about the Burke issue? Because it seemed to me that it, in some ways, it kind of slowed down the momentum of the campaigns, all the campaigns when it first hit late last year.
Yeah, I think there's public corruption, particularly in Chicago, I think is on voters' minds right now, and I think they're just sick and tired of it. Not only the breakdown in trust that it brings on their behalf in the government they have, but also the real dollars that it costs. Mm-hmm. You know, the measurable dollars, and then the unmeasurable ones in things like this. You know, no confidence in their government, the governmental leaders. No confidence in ultimately the future of their city, and their willingness to be part of the solutions.
Do you have an ethics plan?
I do. Yeah, my ethics plan is also just a practical government plan. I'm for term limits, have been from day one. I don't think there's a reason for outside employment by government officials that earn six-figure government salaries.
So you think the aldermen should not have outside jobs?
No, they should not.
And term limits, do you have a specific ceiling on that?
2 term limits for mayor.
Okay.
2 or 3 for aldermen.
Okay.
I'm open to either one. I think the bottom line is we need transparency across the board. 99.9% of transparent measures are going to be good government measures. So and to that end, when it comes to zoning matters specifically, document, log all zoning interactions between the zoning chairman and developers, staffers, and developers, outside parties. Not unduly burdensome conditions. Just document, today, phone call, zoning alderman plus developer, met at a coffee shop. Have a record of all those meetings on both, have that obligation on both the private and the public, so that to the extent there's undue influence or temptations, that would be a further deterrent, knowing that those communications, interchanges were documented. They can go back and it's part of the public process. It should be made known, recorded. But at the end of the day, how much legislation can you do when it comes to trying to eliminate bad or criminal behavior? There are criminal laws on the books. Mm-hmm. You have the opportunity to vote people out if you have concerns about their ethics. And unfortunately, there's also criminal laws, but all these measures that we can take, let's be practical about it and not just do it for PR reasons.
Where do you stand on aldermanic prerogative?
So aldermanic prerogative, if it's a matter like driveway permits, signage, public use things that are objective, those should be, currently they require automatic sign-off. That should not be the purview of an alderman. That should go into a city agency, a city department. Bigger zoning matters, things that are going to affect or impact those residents that live where that potential development is going, should have, in my opinion, significant local input. Now currently that's done through the alderman. If not the alderman, I think there should be a local committee set up to have that input. But I think those matters are better dealt with greater local input than perhaps moving that into a city agency or bureaucrat. Moving it in as far as making that less susceptible to either bribery or extortion or bad behavior. I don't know that that goes away. There may be bad actors inside in the bureaucratic realm too that aren't subject to being voted out. So that's my concern about everybody jumping on the automatic prerogative. Whatever you call it, I do think local matters regarding big developments that are going to have a significant impact on people and businesses that are currently in that geographic area should have significant input from the locals.
The alderman and perhaps some kind of committee of,
Right,
of
right.
local residents. Great. Other questions? I have one more, and that's the fact that we're sitting here in this room on a college campus, and obviously the youth vote, the millennial vote's been discussed a lot in this campaign. There are several candidates that are a lot younger than you that are making that case that it's time for younger voices change from that community. First, how much time have you spent on college campuses? How many times have you been on college campuses since you've been campaigning, and what is your message to the younger voters?
I've been on at least half a dozen times. Our campaign people have been through all the, we have a college program with volunteers. My message to them is to get out and vote, make a difference. I think there was that study that came out a few weeks ago about millennials, 36 or 37% plan on leaving Chicago or strongly considering leaving Chicago. I've found that across, not only I suspected it going into the campaign because it was one of my reasons for running, but I've found that on the campaign trail that is not just among millennials. So many Chicagoans across all stratas. I spoke to a class at Leo High School. I asked them that question in the course of it, 25 or 26 students. I said, raise your hand. We had a great discussion, very engaged. Those who plan on remaining in Chicago, raising your families here or having a career here, 2 of the kids raised their hands. The rest all went out.
Wow.
And that's heartbreaking, almost depressing.
Yeah. So stay and vote and fight.
Exactly, exactly. We got a great city. We'll get through this. Be a part of it.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much, Jerry Joyce.
Thank you for having me. This was
Number
great.
1 on the ballot. That's
great to be with you all.
That's one good sign for your campaign, right?
Yeah.
And many more to come, right?
Yeah, there are more. There are.
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up.
Sure. So again, thank you for coming, Mr. Joyce, and thank you all for coming as well. We do have a seminar coming up on Thursday with yet another candidate in our ChiElect series. So we thank you all for coming, and have a nice rest of your day.
And my last question that I forgot was that we're going to have another forum here on campus in mid-March, March 13th, around policing and public safety issues with the 2 runoff candidates. So if you do make the runoff,
Yeah, I think we booked that already.
Oh, great! Excellent. We got you lined up already. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.